Hello and welcome to the next episode in our Music Mates 80s series. So we've talked about Talking Heads and we did King Crimson on the last episode. And today we have got a really big album alert, a classic album alert from one of the most significant individuals in the history of pop. You certainly don't get the nickname the King of Pop for nothing. Before I kind of go into the main bulk of the podcast, I also wanted to give a couple of honourable mentions, which I'll try and do now on each episode, just to drag the length out a little bit more. So I want to give a shout out to the 1982 album Pornography by The Cure, one of my favourite albums of the 80s. It's another bit of a classic from the era, especially when it comes to more of the alternative underground stuff. It's got a very apocalyptic, gloomy sound to it, so if you're into that, I'd really recommend. I also want to recommend the Kate Bush album The Dreaming, which is my second favourite Kate Bush album. I think it's a lot of people's second favourite Kate Bush album if they're really into her work. One of the strangest albums I've ever listened to. A lot of really surreal imagery, a lot of very, very bizarre influences. If you're in the mood for listening to something that's very eccentric, I would definitely recommend giving that a try. And I also want to give a shout out to the Prince album 1999 and Duran Duran's Rio, which are other really, really terrific albums from this year. The episode that we're doing today is about Michael Jackson, so I thought I would talk a little bit about the life of Michael Jackson first, and I will try and consolidate as much as I can because there is so much to get through, and I'm sure we'll be talking about our favourite bits of lore and weird conspiracies.
Like he's a Dark Souls character.
He really
the MJ
is.
descriptions.
He really
I think
is,
he did
yeah.
kindle the first play. Just putting that out there.
So, Michael Jackson was born in Gary, Indiana in August 1958 to parents Catherine and Joe as their fifth son. Keen on setting his children up for some kind of celebrity acclaim, Joe pressured his sons around kind of 1961-62 into forming a musical group. Michael would go on to become the star boy of this group at a later point that went on to be called the Jackson 5. By 1971, the record label had identified Michael in particular of the group as a bit of a special talent and decided to make him a solo act alongside the Jackson 5. In 1978, while working on Sidney Lumet's adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, Jackson met Quincy Jones, who was at that point a huge figure in jazz and pop in the 50s and 60s. They got along really well and agreed to work on Jackson's next solo album, which would go on to be Off the Wall. And this was very much the first time that kind of... I hesitate to use the word modern because it's now 2024, but at the time it was very much the start of crafting that sound that Jackson would go on to be known for throughout the 80s and the 90s as well. However, it was only the beginning of his astronomical mainstream success with more of a hungry appetite for stardom than Off the Wall had given him. What he would go on to do with his next album, with Quincy Jones's production and songwriter Rod Temperton alongside him, would surpass all expectations as Michael sought to create the ultimate pop album. Thriller would go on to be the best-selling album of all time to date. It's still today, that is the case. Big, right? It sold an estimated 70 million copies worldwide. But that's just according to one site that I've seen. I've seen other websites give different estimations. I think it's something that's probably quite hard to measure incredibly accurately. At the time of Thriller's release, it spent 37 non-consecutive weeks at number one on the US Billboard charts. It has since been widely recognised as one of, if not the greatest pop record ever made for a bunch of different reasons. Sales, cultural impact, influence, and the legacy of the artist that created it, among other reasons, but we'll get onto that more later. Trying to account and detail the events that occurred in his life, both publicly and privately, from this point forward is quite challenging, as I've kind of talked about. There's a lot to cover, both in acclaim and controversy. Jackson's other huge release in the 80s was the 1987 album Bad, the follow-up to Thriller, with singles like the title track, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana, which all reached number one on the Billboard Hot 100. It was, again, quite a big album from the decade. In the same kind of cinematic vein that Jackson had come to show off with his very fleshed-out music videos previously on other albums, Bad had a 17-minute short film directed by none other than Martin Scorsese, which I think is worth mentioning. Aside from his music, Jackson's relationship with the press was a very complex one. From the mid-80s onwards, it started becoming increasingly more noticeable that his skin colour was becoming paler. This caused people to believe that he'd been bleaching his skin. Jackson suffered from lupus and another illness called vitiligo. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Vitiligo is an illness which causes patches of someone's skin to lose its pigment, and then around that kind of time, the press would often invent a lot of stories and perpetuate about what he'd been doing to cover this up, and speculate about other lifestyle choices, cosmetic procedures, not cosmic procedures, other conditions that he had, etc., etc. To the point where it would become quite difficult to know what was true and false about the man. Not to mention the very serious allegations of child molestation that followed Jackson throughout his career and posthumously as well. It's certainly the most infamous aspect of Jackson's life and career. It's a very sensitive subject where Jackson was never found guilty, but there is a significant amount of evidence out there supporting the allegations. I'm probably going to kind of stop talking about this at this point because, like I said, to try and summarise this man's career on an A4 page of text is an impossibility. There's just an obscene amount to talk about in his adult life, his childhood, teenage years, his marriages, his career, his discography, just everything. And I would say, unfortunately, Jackson died in 2009, fairly young, from a propofol and benzodiazepine overdose. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce that. Which was medicine administered to him by his personal physician. As you might have expected, the internet and various social media outlets basically crashed at the time, including a memorial service the next month with a long guest list of major music celebrities and about 2 to 3 billion people watching it on different streaming platforms and TV as well, which just goes to show the kind of legacy this guy had. And I wanted to ask you guys, again, we talked a little bit about this off podcast, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts again. Do you guys remember when he died and how much his face was plastered all over the news? Because I remember for like a month, maybe even more, it was the only thing that people were talking about. And even though it's a long time ago now and we were all quite young, it's still something I remember really well. And I wondered if it was the same for you guys as well.
Yeah, I definitely remember when the news broke, and my first reaction being, "Who is that guy?" Because I was not a very up to date with the pop scene 9-year-old. However, it's definitely clear that this guy, had a huge impact on like music history and wider like celebrity culture, I guess. Like this sort of like the Michael Jackson pattern of like the rise and the fall and the addiction to cosmetic procedures feels like a standard like thing that's happened like since then. It's kind of a tragic tale when you think about it. Obviously, I don't want to give him too much like benefit of the doubt because at the end of the day, he did allegedly do some horrible things. But yeah, I mean, it's also very unfortunate the pressures that he must have faced growing up, being like pushed into this sort of child star path. Star path? Oh my God, that is a cosmic procedure going on the star path. Um, but yeah, I do remember the maths class I think I was in at the time where everyone was talking about it. Um, yeah, I remember our teacher being quite upset, Ethan. I'm sure it probably was the same one.
It's a great
Yeah.
opportunity to dox them right now. Yeah, I think it's no exaggeration to say he's probably the most famous artist since Elvis at the time. Um, I can't think of a single other artist that is as famous, or like even like now, like someone like Taylor Swift. I don't think it's on the same level as Michael Jackson. Um,
See, maybe it's my own personal bias where, like, David Bowie, but I guess he was probably big in a different way. He definitely had cosmic makeovers. But yeah, I think partially because hearing you be like, oh, remembering all that about Michael Jackson. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't remember him passing at all. I
Damn.
think
That's
vaguely
crazy.
it must have been a thing I was aware of, and then just it didn't mean much to me at the time at all. Um, Weirdly, one of the earliest memories I have of Michael Jackson, which must have been fairly soon after he died, I think, was being shown like a mock YouTube video where it's like one of those kind of jump scare ones of like you're alone in the Michael Jackson mansion or something like that, and then just going around various rooms, and then suddenly like a hee hee or something like that. And
That
then he
sounds so
appears.
familiar.
Like that I think is, I mean, I knew the name, but I remember when watching that video not really knowing who he was. And so that is like my formative thing of Michael Jackson, is just like he is dead, a ghost, and somewhat creepy and scary.
Yeah, I think the weirdest thing for me is that I remember it really well. Kind of Tony alluded to this a second ago. I had a particular teacher that was obsessed and would go on a lot about him just generally, and then when he died, that only carried on to be the case. But I don't, Jackson's got so many like great iconic songs, but the song that I think I first remember hearing because she played it in class is Earth Song. I don't know if you guys know the song, if you've ever heard it.
Yes. Yeah, I think Simile probably was one of the first ones I heard in class, having to like write about the lyrics and things like that. Yes, that probably was the first one I was aware of.
Yeah. Well, we were in junior school together, Johnny, and we might have even had that same teacher.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, I find it a bit strange that you just don't really remember this stuff in the same way that we do. So maybe not.
You had to be
think
there.
I think in the background I would have been hearing some of the music. But yeah, the next kind of thing I can then place is one of the Guitar Hero games, having beat it, I think. Because I sort of remember, like, I think it's part of the campaign, and then like there are ghosts. That's probably the next song I got introduced to, or at least actively knowing, oh, that's a Michael Jackson one.
Yeah, Beat It. I was gonna say, I think Beat It and like We Will Rock You are just like two of the songs that I imagine humans are just like born knowing about. Like like the fact that this is like this album basically just tells you like, oh, there was a pre-Beat It world of the Earth. That's like oh, it's before they had like fire. It's like what the hell?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Johnny's saying is a very abnormal experience, because I would say Jackson's death is quite possibly one of the biggest news stories of the 21st century. But to be fair, we were all children. But what you were saying, Tony, is true. That the three songs that are in the middle of this album, Thriller, Beat It, Billie Jean, are songs that are so within the culture and have been played like so much, and are three of possibly the best pop songs of all time, that are sequenced together in this album, which is incredible. But they're just so part of like of music. The cultural osmosis is such that it almost feels like you're listening to like a parody of it when you listen to the real song, just because you've heard it so many times. That actually, like, stepping back and just listening to the songs for this podcast, it's given me an appreciation of like quite how good they are. Because a bit like you say, some of those Queen songs as well, songs that you've just heard so many times that you don't really kind of even think about or consider as like, oh yeah, this is a song that was written and released for an album that came out here. And I think partially it's because of how many copies this album sold and how it was everywhere in the world before we were born. So we were kind of born into the world which was shaped by some of this music.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to think, because like his peak was definitely the 80s. I mean, he continued to release work in the 90s and maybe even the 2000s a little bit, but to think that about 20 years after he really like had kind of the best run of his career, it was still a massive moment for him to die. Just goes to show how long, the kind of influence that he had. I remember and everyone like listened to his music at that time as well. It's a little bit similar to, I remember, so Johnny mentioned David Bowie a second ago. I remember when David Bowie died, and there was a similar thing where like I would turn on the radio and it would just be David Bowie songs, or I'd be walking around the house and my mum would be playing David Bowie songs, or it's just what you would see online if you go on YouTube, or just hear when you're kind of out and about. And it was the same thing with Prince died as well. When these massive stars do go, it is like you do get this kind of cool moment if you like their music, to kind of have that moment where you sort of relive their best songs and moments and things like that. And I think that I think it's quite nice that a lot of the biggest artists in history do get that kind of send off, I guess, if you want to call it that. So yeah, I really like this album. I don't know about you guys. Harry kind of mentioned that there is a central passage of this album which consists of the songs Thriller, Beat It and Billie Jean. And it is one of those sort of 3-song runs that make you go, is there a better 3-song run? It's you get these first 3 songs which are good, and then you have final 3 songs, because the album is 9 tracks in total. And every time I find myself listening to this album, I'm enjoying the first leg of it, but in reality I am like, I'm very kind of, it's almost like an anxiety, like I'm kind of on the edge of my seat waiting to get to that central passage, because I know that you got 3 songs in a row that are the kind of standout part of the album. And I don't know if it's just because they're really, really famous songs, or if it's genuinely because they are great songs. I guess you can make the argument that if something's famous and it's very, very well liked, there's a reason for it. It's because they're great. But I almost want to live in a parallel universe where, like, The Girl Is Mine, is the most iconic song from this album, rather than, one of the other 3 that I've just mentioned.
Like, I don't think The Girl Is Mine has the staying power culturally, unfortunately. I think it's a reason why it's those 3 songs that have stayed in sort of like popular culture for so long. They're practically like encoded in the human genome at this point, I think. They're good.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's just the songs themselves. I think the music videos are a big part of enjoying his music, and like his the aspect of his music that's to do with dancing as well, in particular.
Yeah.
I think is like a really, really key part of, it's like a key facet of this guy's persona. And I think if you're talking about all 3 songs that we've kind of talked about, they all have good music videos. I think Thriller's is the best, just because it really does feel like a short film. It's very, very ambitious, very, very different to what would have been used to at the time. Having like a as I kind of mentioned earlier, a fleshed out concept for something. And I know that Thriller today is a little bit cheesy. It probably would have been a little bit cheesy back in the day as well. I mean, I know it's got a very Hammer horror-esque contribution from Vincent Price that's inseparable from the song, and among a couple of other details, I think that's definitely part of the longevity as well. It's the visuals, not just the music.
Yeah, I think it's weird to be just reviewing the album, because so much of Jackson is the whole package. It's the way he kind of looks, the way he dresses, and like you say, he was a fantastic performer. Like the Mood Walk was obviously incredibly iconic, but so many of his, like, not only is he a fantastic singer, but he's maybe one of the best kind of dancers that of a kind of pop artist that's not a professional dancer. But I think he does exude so much charisma, even when you don't watch the music video and just listen to the album, in his energy. And it's the vocal tics that are so iconic, like the hee-hees and the owls, that have kind of become mocked. But I think he does kind of carry through that energy in the vocals, that even when you're not watching the video, you can still kind of get caught up in the kind of charisma of Jackson. Well, that's why I think anyway. But yeah, when you watch the music videos, especially Thriller, the dances become so iconic. Again, it's one of those things that I feel like I've just always known that music video really well. I've seen it so many times. Yeah, and it rightly so, because it's phenomenal. I mean, it's when you actually sit and think about Thriller, it is such a strange song that this kind of like Hammer horror kind of parody song in the middle of this kind of pop album works so well. With this kind of like iconic kind of horror actor delivering like a minute long monologue about ghosts and ghouls. But sick as fuck, man. It's great.
Yeah, it's like the perfect storm almost of things that shouldn't be cool but become cool. I think it's funny that you bring up that VO by Vincent Price because I just read a tweet from some random person, so it could all be an entire lie. But apparently, instead of taking a percentage cut of the sales of the album, they did the voiceover for a flat rate of only
Oh my
$20,000.
god.
So if, that's a lot of money that they missed out on. But that's a great deal because their performance, their voiceover is really cool. It has like a good like gravitas and texture to it that is like the exact right like counterbalance to sort of Jackson's like kind of I guess it's like light and airy vocal sort of texture.
Yeah, and it's just part of the ambition of the record as well to bring on a guy who's fairly well known for a long, very well regarded career in horror films to come in and do something like that. It's ambitious to have Paul McCartney come in and have a feature on another song. It's ambitious to have Eddie Van Halen come in and do the guitar solo on "Beat It." It definitely feels listening to this that he was trying to go all out to make a statement and make something that was going to last. And I think he brought on quite a few talented musicians and artists to come on and realize that, which I think is great.
When we've been talking, Ethan and Tony, because we've mentioned the album in passing, a comment I made was, Johnny always has the wildest takes, and I have no idea what he's going to pull out in this ep. So I'm very excited to hear what Johnny thinks of the album.
Yeah, so I think I was expecting more from the album. Whereas like looking at it and then being like, yeah, well, obviously I know Thriller, Beat It, Billie Jean, I think I'm aware of. And then just sort of was there being like, well, presumably the rest aren't going to be as good, but they'll still be like, there'll be something to them. There'll be Michael Jackson songs, the king of pop in the best-selling album. And it's just like, oh, Want to Be Starting Something is just 6 minutes of nothing much happening. And then just like, well, yeah, okay, maybe the next song, that's also not terrible. And the next one, that's got Paul McCartney in, and that was not memorable. Okay, well, now we're on to Thriller, and that's not seeming as good as I remember it. And Beat It, well, even I think Beat It I like more, and that's also not seeming as good as I remember it. And and then, I reached the end of the album, and it's like, well, that was an album.
Yeah, I think Jono makes a good point. I think it is kind of impossible for like actually listening to the album to match up with like the sort of like cultural impression you get of it. Like even though I still really like it, I'm like the idea of it in my head is still like so like oh wow, this is Michael Jackson. He's like the number one all time, music person, as they call them. So I kind of agree with Jono on that front. Like I understand where that sort of like I guess like overhyped type like expectation like overrated is the word I'm looking for. And also I did start skipping Want to Be Starting Something on repeat listenings. I'm sorry.
I think am I the biggest fan of that? I mean, for me, it's you've got the three in the middle that are on a level above everything else in the album, and then I would very comfortably have Want to Be Starting Something as the fourth best song. And then
I'm on the same page as you, Harry.
And then obviously Johnny said there's nothing memorable about The Girl Is Mine. I think you can say a lot about The Girl Is Mine, but I think the spoken word bit at the end is so bad. It kind of comes all the way around full circle and makes me kind of look upon the song fondly because it's so cheesy. The we're not going to fight about this, Michael. And Michael Jackson's just high pitched like creepy voice. Yeah, it's great. They just you talk about two people that have no chemistry together. It's so stupid.
I really like just how funny it is. Like I'm like taking it like it's kind of like a sort of like a sitcom episode about a love triangle, but just in song form. And it's really like the way like Paul McCartney's like one bit at the end where it's like it almost sounds like he like breaks character because Michael Jackson is like after loving me she could never love another, and he's like, she really said that, did she? It catches me off guard every time, even though I know it's coming. It's so like earnest. It's like it's just such a strange conceit of just like yeah, it's just like back and forth like she, the dark gone girl is mine.
I don't think the song's very good, but I do think the breakdown section goes hard. Like when all the instruments come in and it gets a bit orchestral and the synths are really nice. I do quite like that section, but yeah, generally it's quite an average song at best. And then that outro section is so kind of embarrassingly poor that it is just not a very good song.
If the song had been the biggest song on the album and one of the biggest pop songs of all time, do you think we'd still be using the word doggone?
I think it would have caught on. Well, to be fair, it's not like I'm telling people to beat it, like to go away very often.
Yeah, that is the thing. So Beat It is a great song, but it fundamentally it's very uncool. Because I guess the kind of conceit of Beat It is like these streets are tough, you know. You got to kind of wisen up, and Jackson just can't convincingly sell the tough guy for me. I don't know what you guys think. I think there's something about him, like you know, he is cool, but he's not tough.
But isn't the song ultimately about like putting our differences aside and coming together in a healthy, constructive way?
I mean, really, what it is about is Guitar Hero, and the stage is being possessed by ghosts, and you're telling them to go. Like that is what the song is about to me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that it's kind of like I think it's interesting that you bring that up, Harry, that he doesn't really sell like the sort of macho like side of like being a cool star because it's more about like accepting reality in the sense that like you should just do the pragmatic thing and run away if you're ever in a fight, which is the actual correct advice you should give anyone that's ever in like a you see two random thugs in the street, JRPG battle music starts playing, just press the flee button on your action menu, just beat it. So I think that's interesting. You know, it's trying to it's almost like being a bit more realistic, a bit more like yeah, the idea of being like a guy who just goes around beating up people who's super strong is like a fiction.
I don't think many people, as in many of the extras and you know the gang members that come in and do the dancing towards the end. I don't think many of them sell the idea that they're particularly you know tough guys. I mean, it is a pop song at the end of the day. They've come in to be dancers and they've just been given caps and like leather outfits and stuff and earrings.
Yeah, there's a real element of camp around it. Although Billie Jean is still very cool. I think
Yeah.
I think of the three, it might be my favorite. I don't know. It's a real debate because I think the three songs are you know excellent. But there's something about the storytelling in Billie Jean and kind of continuing to return to that like one line throughout the entire song that works really well for me. And I think Jackson sells it more than he does the tough guy kind of act in a Beat It.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I like the fact that that Thriller is a bit more kind of disco oriented. I like the fact that Beat It is just a really good pop rock song, but this one there's kind of like a smoothness to it, with that sort of like shimmering bass line at the start. That kind of like it's like a bass line that's walking up like a staircase. It's just really 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 smooth, and yeah, it's very good. It's got a lot of great lines. Harry mentioned earlier on that something that he likes about Michael's music is all of those like he-he's and oohs and ahs and stuff like that. And I actually love all that stuff too. I think it's one of my favourite aspects of his music because I just like all these little embellishments that to just come in all the time throughout the song. I just think it helps I think it helps the music feel quite well realized. I think it's a staple part of his music. And I also think that it gives the feeling that the man performing the music feels very in touch with what he's performing, because it's almost like when he's singing. I mean, sure, I know that a lot of them will be overdubs and like separate vocal tracks and things like that, but generally I think those kind of moments, those sort of brief sounds that he makes us, that they feel like there's something like very freestyle about them, and it just makes someone come across, like I said, like they're very in touch with their music. That it causes them to have these kind of cool little woos and ahs and uhs and yes and the gasps and the moans and the hee hees, like all of those. I just think I think they're all really really cool.
It keeps the energy up, doesn't it? Kind of.
Yeah, I think they're incredibly like well timed with like the flow of the song to make it feel like there's always like it always has like an interesting like texture to it without ever becoming like too busy. Um, yeah, I agree. They're really they got mocked from they're like the one like piss take thing from Michael Jackson. Well, one of many piss take things from Michael Jackson. Just being like, oh, he says he, but that's like, yeah, they really work in the little parts of the song that they're in.
For sure, for sure. Um, Jonathan was talking a little bit about his thoughts on the album. I actually kind of agree. I really like this album, and I think the songs that separate the middle third are good, but I certainly think that they suffer a little bit from blurring into one. In a way, I've listened to this album quite a few times, and in my mind, I still can't tell the difference really between Lady in My Life and Pretty Young Thing and Human Nature, and I kind of have a similar sort of, maybe less so, but a similar issue with the first third of the album as well. And I don't know if it's because that middle third is so good that if you can't keep up with that quality, then there's a serious issue around consistency across the album, and that's ultimately why it feels maybe a bit flatter. Like I said, I still think the songs are good.
Yeah.
Because they're not on that level. It kind of, I think it lowers your expectations a little bit in your thoughts.
Oh, I've listened to the album 4 times, just because we kept cancelling when we were going to do this podcast. Last time I listened to it was today, and looking at the track list, I could not tell you what Baby Be Mine and Human Nature are as songs. Like I couldn't tell you anything memorable about those 2 tracks. I guess you like you said, I personally really like the opening track, and we've got those 3 in the middle. The Girl Is Mine is very memorable, partially for the wrong reasons because of how it ends. I think of the final 3, Pretty Young Thing stands out as probably my favourite of the 3. The Lady in My Life kind of does drone on a bit, but I'm always forgiving of a kind of slower final song on an album for some weird reason. But yeah, I think that they're at a kind of consistent, kind of average quality that are probably better than a lot of music. But because they're essentially the bread of like this incredible kind of 3 tracks in the middle of the album, it does kind of feel like you're just personally, I'm just racing to get to those songs, and then after they're finished, I can take or leave what kind of remains.
Yeah, it's like a warm up and a cool down part of the album, which
Yeah.
I think is a good way of structuring it overall. But I also do think that there's like at least like it's not like I stop listening to the album after Beat It finishes. I think, sorry, after Billie Jean finishes. I think Human Nature and PYT have enough of like a little unique flair to them that like even though like they don't hold the same spot in my memory as being on the level of the best 3, they're like still like, oh yeah, PYT. That's got like a cool little techno sounding bit in it, like a robot. Neat.
I think Human Nature has quite a good synthy intro that plays a couple of times in the song. It kind of has this like spiraling feel to it, like it's whisking you away somewhere. I do quite like that about it, but it's not like the thing is I don't want to downplay the performances on these songs. The vocal performances are good, the mix is good. the whole album is still very, very polished. They all feel like songs that exist, that as in that should exist on Thriller and sound like they belong on this album, except there's very clearly some kind of difference in quality between those other 6 songs and the central 3 songs. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the dancing, which I mentioned is a really, really big part of what I think makes Jackson's entire personality and character as a musician really, really good. One of my favourite songs of his is Smooth Criminal, which isn't on this album, but I have a memory of being quite young and watching that, and then the music video for Thriller, and just being in awe at how well he dances. And I think I still have this today. I still rewatch those music videos every now and then because I enjoy seeing the good choreography. I enjoy seeing the flair. I enjoy seeing the fluidity. The speed and the sharpness as well. That's the thing. It's like you're seeing someone who's so in control of their body and the way they move that there's just something that I really, really gravitate to and just enjoy watching someone who is good at their craft. And then you've also got specific dance moves that are just, embedded into history forever. Harry mentioned the moonwalk earlier. That's probably the most famous one. I still don't know how. I'm sure there's a YouTube video you could watch that explains how it's done. I still don't. If I try and do it, I would just walk backwards, which isn't a moonwalk. So it's probably quite difficult. You've got the that kind of rope pulling move that's also very cool in Beat It. You got that shrugging side to side move in the zombie part in Thriller, and in Smooth Criminal, one of my favourites. It's very, very simple, very, very simple little trick where there's a moment in the song where he and a few other people that are dancing around him, a few other gangsters, kind of lean forwards, but it's not like it's not like the kind of lean forwards where you're doing like a small bow. I mean, it's like the kind of thing where you're leaning so far you should be falling over. And of course it's done with a little hook in your back that keeps you from falling. But I just really, really like things like that. I think it's so innovative. I think it's so great that these music videos and the dance routines in particular enhance the music. I really do.
Yeah, I think it like the showmanship all around from like all the different little touches really makes it feel kind of like a bit of like a magic performance. Except instead of like tricks, you're just sort of falling for like the cool persona that Michael is beaming into your brain. I think my favorite trick that he does was ones where he's like, I think it's also in Smooth Criminal, where he just like pushes the microphone stand in such a way that it like does like a full on like circular wobble, but it's timed perfectly with the dance moves he does. It's like how is the kind of thing that you're just impressed by it purely because of how difficult it looks to do. Which is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else got any thoughts they want to talk about, conspiracy theories they want to dive into? Because that's always going to be a fun part of the episode.
What if he's still alive?
What if he's in Argentina after all this time? I think my favourite one has got to be the Sonic the Hedgehog 3 one. I just think that's such an outlandish conspiracy theory. I think Harry, you probably know a little bit more about it, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is true. I think he did it, and then there were some controversies around him, and I think he probably wasn't happy with how the Sega console, I can't remember if it was the Genesis or the Saturn at the time, how it could render the compositions he'd done. But I think it's largely considered that the music of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is Michael Jackson as an uncredited kind of composer.
Man, Michael Jackson's in great company of musical legends that have worked on Sonic.
Could you imagine if Michael Jackson did the Sonic Adventure soundtrack?
He actually could do an amazing cover of Live and Learn.
But
You're
could
so
Crush
right.
40 do Thriller? That's the question.
No. So that settles. Who's the best musician of all time from those two?
I want to ask you guys a question. We don't have to go into it in too much detail or anything like that, because I realise that, again, I guess it's probably a bit of a it probably brings the mood of the podcast down a little bit. But I am genuinely curious, because I have this problem a little bit. But when you're listening to Michael Jackson's music, do you have a is your enjoyment of the music harmed a little bit or a lot by the things that we know about him that he almost certainly did in his private life, that he was never found guilty of? Is that an issue for you guys when you're listening to the music at all? Is it something that enters your head much when you're listening to the music?
I think it's always going to be sort of hard to separate in some ways. I don't know how much it's kind of always there in the back of my mind and just stopping me from being able to like fully enjoy some of his music. I know something my brother was telling me. So he used to work in an Oxfam shop, and obviously there you get tons of old album CDs coming through. And one of the perks of volunteering on the till is you get to pick one of those CDs to play as the music. So my brother would never pick Michael Jackson, but occasionally one of the other volunteers would. And then if he was ever taking over from their till, he'd just sort of pause it and take it off. But wouldn't stop them from playing it, but just sort of, it was always in his mind of like, ooh, do we kind of want to be playing this? And talking with my mum as well, so she used to work with sort of, I guess vulnerable kids would be one way of saying it. Yeah, with one group of them, they were sort of saying how much they liked Michael Jackson and enjoyed his music. And she remembers this must have been after, I think, before he died, but after he became questionable. Because sort of all the staff were kind of thinking, ooh, this makes us uncomfortable. Should we, I don't know, tell them, try to have them stop or what? In the end, they just let it slide, I think. But it seems, well, yeah, I think that's always going to be part of his legacy, really. For better or worse. Well, no, definitely worse.
Yeah, definitely worse. Definitely worse. Was there anyone else that wanted to talk a little bit about how they feel about the subject?
Yeah, I'm definitely more in the camp of like, I don't know if I do this consciously or if I just like forget. Like whenever I'm listening to the song, that I don't think it gets in the way of my enjoyment. But that being said, I think it would be a much more different story if he was still alive. I feel like I'm like a lot more. I feel like less bad about like kind of valorizing like his image and like the good parts of his legacy now that he's like definitely dead and not like in any way profiting from the fact that I'm like glazing his history. Whereas, you know, if he was still like, you know, like getting that fraction of a penny from every Spotify listen, I would be like, oh, I'll find something else to listen to.
I think it definitely helps that he went through such a big physical transformation as well, that you can almost like split it from like white and black MJ. And like the Thriller era Michael Jackson, I don't really associate with like the Netherland and like all the the creepy stuff. You know, that kind of comes a little bit later.
It's kind of like the opposite of Gandalf.
I mean, I guess it's a little bit like the whole Polanski thing. When we did The Pianist, it's a similar conversation. But I think my issue with that was more that, like, when you watch Rosemary's Baby or Chinatown, that's kind of before all that stuff happened. But when you're watching The Pianist, you're like, well, everyone knows, and like all of these artists have like just made the decision to like continue to work with Polanski. I think it's an interesting one with Michael Jackson. The other thing is that he was tried for stuff and he was kind of exonerated. Like he was found legally like not guilty. Not that I'm saying I think he's innocent. I think he's an incredibly suspicious person. And I sort of believe the allegations against him. But I don't know. I think it's a very messy situation. In terms of if it affects the music, I think when I listen to the album Bad, I definitely feel like a lot weirder than when I listen to Thriller. I think because it's a little bit closer to all that stuff happening, and it almost feels like some of the lyrical content is alluding to it. I mean, the hit from the album is literally called "Smooth Criminal," and there's no way you can listen to that song and be like, yeah, okay, this is a very suspicious man. He is a smooth criminal. But it doesn't really detract from my enjoyment of Thriller, personally.
That's actually really interesting to hear all of you three talking about it, because I think that I'm kind of a sort of, I guess, a collection of all three of you, in the sense that I am kind of with Johnny in that there is something lurking at the back of my mind when I'm listening to it, but at the same time it's reasonably easy a lot of the time for me to just not think about it, and it's not like it's a conscious choice, it's just naturally how I listen to his music. I also think that you should never look down on certain people who do carry on listening to Michael Jackson's music, because I think it's a personal preference and I think it's how you feel about the subject. Michael's certainly not the first artist in music or any industry to have been alleged to have done some really, really terrible things. And in music, I have a similar thing with other artists, like Kanye, for example, is one of them, where I do like Kanye's music and I've been listening to it for a while, but there is still something at the back of my head that says what this guy has come out and said and done, and the people that he's endorsed, it's just all... It makes it difficult to fully commit to the music. So I think it's the sort of thing where you take it case by case, and no one should ever really make you feel like you're not justified in the way that you feel about the stuff. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, as long as you're not like pro the crimes.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, are you guys ready to move on to the conclusion and giving the album a score out of 10?
Sure.
I am. Yeah.
Cool. Normally I don't go first, I go last, so I'd like to keep that tradition and ask one of you three to go first, if you don't mind.
I'm happy to go first. So my final point I want to say, that's like the note, or that I will leave this album discussion on, is I wish there was like a way to like understand and appreciate like the craft of being like a successful and like such a charismatic person without it like essentially like overlapping with like idol worship and like the sort of a sort of weird parasocial relationship thing that I think happens with a lot of celebrities. Because I think like Michael Jackson's whole appeal is that he has like perfected the technical craft of being really cool, and I think that comes across a lot in Thriller. I think also like it goes without saying like that main run of 3 songs is like such a mainstay of like cultural like weight and significance, and for good reason. You know, they're cool bangers. He's got a great sense of rhythm and space in like the music of like space within like the music, like left right sort of the audio. I don't know what the technical term is, but like it feels like a full, like well balanced composition of sound. Always.
What you mean, like a stereo experience?
Yeah. I think a lot of his like little details really make that stereo experience, good word, feel really full and interesting. And also that complements with the fact that he's just you get this great sense of charisma through like the story this album tells about Thriller, about, you know, he's a werewolf one day, then he's running away from criminals. Doesn't make sense, but I believe it. I buy it. Anyway, I'll give Thriller a 9 out of 10.
Wow, I praise.
I'll step in next and try and work out what my feelings are. It's so I think it's clear that this is not really an album that engaged me, and I think there's an internal bias that I have just because knowing that it is like the best-selling album is going to be hard for me not to kick against it more just because of that. Because I feel it's because it hasn't engaged me. I don't want to overgo the wrong side and then say, oh, it's bad, because I don't think it's a bad album, but I don't know if I feel like it's a good album.
It's middle of the road.
Yeah, so this is another area where like my granular I'm only going for 1.5s or 10s gets possibly easier because I'm just going to slap a 5 on it. But because it did disappoint me somewhat, there was a voice in my head saying give it a 1. But I think it's a 5.
That's fine.
Cool.
All right, Ethan, I'll go. So you can round it off with your final thoughts. I think I pretty much said everything I want to say about the album. There's 3 very good songs in the middle. I don't know if you picked up on that. It's quite subtle. I think I'm going to give it an 8. I think at one point I would have given it a 9, but on that final listen, it sort of confirmed that ultimately it does come down to those 3, and then the opening track as well as being the bangers, and everything else is kind of mid to actively bad. So yeah, I'll give it an 8.
Cool. As for me, I guess I wanted to round it off by saying that it's even though we are sat here talking about an album, it's a little bit difficult to just review the album. I consider the I guess, I don't know, I think paratext is what it might be called. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but basically the world that exists outside this album, and my experiences with Jackson's music in the past and all of the things that we've talked about on the episode around the dancing and the music videos, for me that's all part of the collective experience that I find difficult to ignore. I can't just treat this as 9 songs. There's a little bit extra outside of that. And the legacy that this album has and what Jackson has done for music, from so many angles, like I mentioned influence. We've not even really talked about race being a really, really big part of his legacy, both in his, physical transformation and what that has done for his music and his career, but also some of the great work that his early music videos did for getting black artists regular rotation on MTV, which was something that wasn't really seen before Billie Jean. These kind of things, they are really, really important, and I don't think should be looked over. As for the album itself, I think Thriller is an album, as Harry mentioned, where a lot of the heavy lifting is performed by those 3 songs that we've talked about the most, that have, without a doubt, imprinted themselves forever in music history. Whereas I think the 6 other songs outside are all pretty good too and enjoyable, apart from The Girl Is Mine.
Hey.
But there's clearly a quality... Terry, I'm sorry. It's just true, though.
It's okay.
There is clearly a quality drop before and after Thriller, Beat It and Billie Jean, and I think that lack of consistency is something that does impact the overall album experience for me, but it's still really good overall, so I'm going to join Harry and give it an 8. I believe that's fair. Great. So that is 1982. That's Thriller by Michael Jackson. Tony, I don't know if you wanted to give a little bit of an overview or a teaser for what's coming next, or if we could just wrap it up here.
Yeah, I'll let our viewers know to get ready for next time that the 1983 album we will be doing next episode is Frontiers by Journey. Stay tuned.